Hey, how's it going? This is Hellbent, and today I'm going to be doing a special GUI tutorial where I introduce custom controls. And for this episode, I'm joined by a special guest, Joe Glines. Joe, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Hey, yeah. So I started watching Hellbent's videos. I think a couple months ago, but I've been using AutoHotkey for quite a while, but I hadn't done much with GUIs, and so it was awesome to watch and learn from his GUI stuff. And then we started chatting on the side, and then so we've been kind of doing cross videos to help teach each other, and then that way we figure, people, because we're asking, like in today, I'm as dumb as I sound on this topic, right? So I'm not actually asking questions just to sound like I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't know what I'm doing. So I'm looking forward to this.
Well, it's going to be this. It's not going to be that difficult. This one's going to be actually pretty simple. We're just going to breach the subject of creating custom controls for your GUI. So what I'll start out with is when I first started learning about the AutoHotkey GUI, one of the things that I noticed was the controls on them. They're fine for presenting information, but they're very bland, very boring. And right away, one of the things I wanted to do was make them look different. I wanted to maybe just change the color of a button, change the color of the text on it, et cetera, et cetera.
Can I stop you there real quick? Because like that thing alone, controls, right? To me, I don't know how to correctly define that. Is that any sort of a part of a GUI? Is there certain...
Well, I'm actually going to go into that before we start making adding in our custom controls. Is I'm actually going to show you how I was able to discover
Cool.
how to actually create like something that it was sort of like I had this jigsaw puzzle, and I had most of the pieces there, but I was just missing a crucial element. And it was through this, what I'm going to show first, that I was able to actually start to tie things together in my head. And once I had this, it sort of started to snowball where I could actually understand how it works.
Cool.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a simple GUI template and maybe add a button or two to it. All right, so all I have right now is just my single instance force, and I have my emergency exit. Other than that, I'm just going to create my template. So I'm just going to do my GUI show, and I'm going to make it a nice big one, 500 by 500, width 500 by height 500. And I'll add in my return. So now that I have this, I'm going to make sure that I don't have to keep running the script. So I'm just going to also add in the GUI close. So for those that don't know, when you run the script, it comes with this button up at the top corner, but by default, it doesn't do anything. You actually have to program it to do something. So what I'm going to do now is program it so that when we click on that button, it'll actually exit the script.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is a special one, that because you didn't have to go name it, right?
Yes, it's built into the code. There's AutoHotkey it's kind of like you're looking at the tip of the iceberg. There's tons and tons of things below the surface that we never see. And that's the same with every programming language.
Sure.
Right? It's built on top of other things and other things. Most of the functions that you'll see, you never actually see how it's built inside of it. Like I started out programming in C, and a lot of the things in that is functions. So you would have, if you wanted to print something on the screen, you would type out printf, right? Which would be a print function. Yeah. And then if you go and inspect the code below that, there could be hundreds of lines of code that actually dealt with how it presented that onto the screen.
Right.
So yeah, this is one of the built-in labels that's already built into it. So it knows as soon as I put this in that when I press that button up at the top of the screen, it'll close our script and exit it. But I can have this
do whatever
it'll do whatever I want. I can make it pop up a message, run a program, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we have our GUI template. So I'm going to just go ahead and add in a couple of buttons. Now these buttons, they don't really matter what they're doing. We don't have to attach them to any labels. I don't even need to add any variables to them. I can just put them in, and I'll let them size themselves. So I'm just going to copy this a couple of times. And I'm going to have a look at what I have. So I should have 4 buttons that are probably about 20 by 20 in size. So they're very difficult to see. So what I'll do also is I'll change the background color because it's going to be difficult for you to see those buttons on the background. And I'll set it to black. Now, for anyone that's just joining, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be covering this, I cover in usually individual tutorials. So most of the stuff we're going to be covering is very basic, but if you want to know more about some of these things like adding in buttons and labels and changing the GUI's color, showing it, etc., those things, I think I'm up to 22 mini tutorials on topics like that.
You have many tutorials?
Yes, many tutorials. Okay, so now you can see I have these 4 buttons, right? And what I would normally do is I would go, now with buttons it's a different beast, but if they were some other like a checkbox or something like that, I would want to have a variable associated with it because I want to retrieve a value, like I want to store a value, so that way I can do testing later on to actually see if it has this value or that value, and depending on which one of those it is, it'll do different things. Buttons, usually you don't have to worry about that too much because you're just clicking on the button and it executes the contents of the label that I attached to it. I'll add in one more control just to show a...
And just to make sure I understand this correctly, so these are all controls on the one GUI, right?
Yes.
And then you don't have to say, what is it, the show? Is that what stops the GUI from, if you were to add another GUI?
If I was, what I could do is in the same space, I can create multiple GUIs. Now, the better way of doing it is to actually separate them.
Mm-hmm.
To, like, I would build one in its own section, so all the controls for that one would be in its own section, and then I'll have another section for the other GUI. But I could build, this could be 4 GUIs with 4 buttons, and I could create it like that, but it would be a pain in the butt to actually work with it like that. With 4 controls, not a problem. When you have hundreds of controls on multiple GUIs, you want to separate them into their own section, or even you can build them into functions, which is another thing that I'm going to cover sooner or later.
And it's just, I think, is it right where you're talking? It's by adding a label or a name to it?
Yes. So if right now this is using basically the default GUI, but if I want to add multiple of them, all I would do is I just want to create a name for that GUI or a label to it. Mm-hmm. So the most straightforward way would just be to number them, but there's going to be reasons why numbering them isn't a practical thing to do, because for what I've worked with, sometimes I'll have, I know that I want to have multiple GUIs going, but I don't know how many. So what I will do is with most of them, I will just number them. So I'll have, this is GUI 1, and then have a colon beside everything that's to do with that GUI. But then I might come to a situation where I don't know how many of these numbers that I'm going to have. And in that case, what I'll do instead is actually use a name. So, and it's, in essence, it's the same thing, right? So I'm using right here, I'm using the a literal character 1 to name this one, right, and identify all of its parts.
So that's kind of like a label in the way labels are added, right? That
exactly. And I just got to make sure that I keep track of adding this label into all the different GUIs.
And then I take it the show, you would do the same thing, and that would know which one it's talking about?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Go ahead. I was just, because I knew you could have more than one, and that's what always, I wish it was actually required, because then it'd be easier for me to, understand I'm going into a new one. But anyway, all right.
Okay, so I'm going to add one more control. And I might have to actually size these ones here. The edit, I think it'll size itself okay, but this one here, I'm going to make it a width of 200 and a height of 30. And I'll add some text to it. Now our default color is the same color as our background, so I'll come in here and I'll change this color to lime. So it'll be nice and bright on the screen. Okay, so I think I have enough to actually run the next part. Okay, so here I have 3 different control types. And now what I'm going to do is to demonstrate the kind of thing that triggered me understanding how the GUI and custom controls work. So I'm just going to create a hotkey. I'm going to use numberpad 1 and I'm going to create a little program that all it's going to do is it's going to loop, and I'm going to get, what is it? Yeah. I'm going to use mouse get position because it has inside of it, one of the options is this output variable control.
Oh.
Right? So I'm going to just add enough commas to get to that. So 1, 2, 3. And I think I'm in the right one. And I'm just going to give it I'm going to name a variable. It doesn't matter what I call it, but I'm going to call it control. And then I'm going to pop up a tooltip that shows me the name of the control.
Mm-hmm.
I think I should be okay. I'm not sure if I need to add anything else here, but oh, there we go. Okay, so this, I noticed this code here when I was first starting out, and I was playing around with it, and I had just built a GUI. Now, let me see, X, Y. Yeah, okay, I have the right amount. So I was running this program where I was getting the X position, the Y position. I was checking out, just basically playing around discovery. And I had this running, and I went over one of these controls. And here I saw static 1. And then I go over and edit, and I have edit 1. And button, I have button 4, button 3, button 2, button 1. So it clicked into my head that these are all controls. And the button here, because all of them have that name, that ability to actually look at it like this, it dawned on me, you know what? what I can probably do is I can probably actually stick a label in this text field and create that label down here and have it execute something. So now, when I run this, if I go and click on this text, I can actually make it behave like as if it's a button. Or what my impression of what a button was, right? I didn't know at the time that there's no real difference. It's just pixels on the screen. But this demonstration here is what opened it up that, you know what? A button, all these controls, all they are is basically just pixels on the screen and my ability to actually trigger some event when I click on it.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to me that you're just using the coordinates basically, where AutoHotkey is keeping track of where that shape is on the screen, and then where your mouse is, and if your mouse is over those coordinates, then
yeah, it gets it's like the window spy. It's like this is just a piece of that window spy.
I mean, it sounds stupid, but I'm so literal, real world of like, when you say I'm making a button, I'm going to click it. In my head, it makes no sense, but I'm like, I'm literally pushing the thing, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah. So
reality,
as far as we're concerned, or as far as like as it really matters, all this button is just a bunch of pixels that are drawn on the screen.
Yeah, yeah. And then you're keeping track of what your mouse clicks or whatever, but over in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
So that thing right there, where I could actually attach a label to any kind of control that I wanted, so that way I can make it do things, opened it up that, you know what, if I put a picture there instead, I can attach a label to that picture.
I'm just curious, because you have those 4 buttons, and they were
mm-hmm.
And when you moused over them, I think they said button 1, button 2, button 3. But
Yes.
you added a name like to the second or third
It
one.
doesn't matter. It would still show the same thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's their control. So here, let
it
me
doesn't throw
give it
up
a
the
variable. I'm going to
variable?
call this. I'm going to
Yeah.
call this but1.
Yeah.
Right. I don't need to do it for the rest of them
Yeah.
because
Right.
it'll be the same.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to hit my number pad 1, and I'm going to go. So button 4, button 3, button 2, button 1 still.
Huh.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. A bunch of different controls. Like say for example, a group box also is considered has a button. So if I was to hover over a group box, it would also show me that it's a button. So here, this is an image. So these are all images up here, and it shows as static, which is the same as a text field. And then if I go over this group box, it shows as button 3.
Which, and I mean, you can do it over even the taskbar, right, or other stuff.
Yeah.
That just gets into the strength of AutoHotkey. When you're doing stuff, it doesn't have to be just AutoHotkey code that you're doing it on, right?
Yeah.
Actually detect.
Well, like I said, this line right here is built into that spy tool that you get when you get AutoHotkey. So this is just one of the lines that they would have built into that, and for some reason okay, there we go, froze up. So yeah, this line here would be basically the stuff that's in here, or some of the stuff that's in here. So we got, or here we have the mouse position, right? But this is just me streamlining and just going for what I want. Okay, so like I said, it was that understanding that I tied the two together, that a control is anything that I want it to be, really. Like I can make.
Sorry, I was just thinking. So, like in that other tool, do they call it class in the other tool?
They do have a thing called class. Let me.
I mean, is that different than the controls?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, because this would be, I think, right here.
No, there was something else. That's the
Oh, you're talking about here. You're talking about here. So yeah, okay.
There,
So
yes.
class, yeah. There we go. There we go. So if I run this, we should see.
There's the button.
The class NN.
Yeah. Okay. I'd never realized that, but that now I suddenly, like, holy cow! That this is awesome.
Right, and like I said, there's tons of things that I'm not going to be able to cover in this tutorial.
Yeah.
Right, that we can do with the information that we can get off the GUI. But all we're going to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take that understanding that a control, we can get information off the control, and we can attach pretty much any of our controls to a label. And now certain controls, they have different requirements to trigger the label. For example, an edit field, by default, I'd need to type something into it, or I would need to hit spacebar or something like that. I can't just click it and have it execute the label. But many of the other controls that we have, we can just click it and it'll execute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an image, or I have a bunch of images that I was thinking of using. But actually, you know what? Before we do that, what I'll do is, nah, that's kind of boring. I was thinking that all I would have to do to create a checkbox or a radio button is technically all I would have to do is create the font that's super huge, and then just put a period as the text that's displayed, and you'll have a square. And I can make the square green when I click it, or I can make it gray when I click on something else. Right? So I can even use just a period, just a text control with a period in it, as long as the font is big enough that it'll be 20 pixels by 20 pixels. But we're gonna take an actual image, and for this first starting point, I'm just going to create a new one, and I'm just going to make it, because I'm just going to use a solid color for this first part. So I'll make it 100 by 100. can paint it, whatever.
I don't do much with images. So like I saw a resolution and there's something to it. None of that matters. Is that right?
When we start getting into the other controls, like you want to keep for example, a control like this here, where I have text on it. I want to keep the ratio. There will get some distortion if I make it too big or too small, but for the most part, I do have some room I can play around with if I keep its ratio the same. So this one here is 140 pixels by 40 pixels. So I can do 280 by 80.
Yeah, no, I understand all that stuff. It was just, I know there's a couple other dimension things on images, that I just have never understood much about the dots per inch and other things that if it matters.
Most of the time, no. Most of the time, as long as you set, especially if you set the image's size. I haven't really had any issues with distortions or anything like that.
Yeah, like you said, I know better than to change the ratio of the X to Y or with it.
I'm trying to find out where I actually saved that script. I think it's on my desktop, so I'm just going to go with that. And I'm just going to call this yellow. So I'm just creating a basic PNG that is 100 by 100 pixels, and it's just a solid color yellow.
And does it matter as far as PNG versus GIF versus whatever?
I don't go into that stuff too much, but my understanding was when I looked it up like a year ago or so is that PNG in general gives a better resolution than JPEG.
I heard it's a great overall value of the quality and also file size.
Yeah, but I'm clueless to this stuff, so I just saw that PNG is better than JPEG. Okay, I make everything PNG.
Yeah. I think for those GIFs actually, because when you have fewer colors, GIFs do a great job. But when you start having a lot of different colors, then you need either some other stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, but as far as I've never really gone that deep into this stuff. I'm not an artist, and I don't normally work too much in this stuff, only when I have to. For the longest time, all my thumbnails, I actually did everything in MS Paint. And when I would have to overlay things, it was such a pain to overlay images on top of each other because they don't have that by default where I can add layers.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and add in that picture. And I don't care where it goes. I'm just going to make sure that I get its width and height. Now, it will auto size itself, but from my own experience with where I'm doing things that can change over the course of time, just take the extra second or two and set it to what you want.
I do remember in stuff where the text is going to change, and then suddenly it's no longer, or you have wider text than what you initially had, and that causes.
So it's better just to take the extra second, set it the way you want it, and then you don't have to worry about it. And then I think it was. Now I don't think I'm going to have a problem, but up here. Now, once you start working with images, most of the time if you're just running it right from the script, as long as it's in the same directory, you don't really have a problem. But once you have other programs that actually run it, so for example, this I can run all kinds of different programs with. As soon as I tie this script into this, I actually need to specify its working directory. In other words, it won't, even though it's in the directory, it still won't load it. Yeah. I actually figured that out when I created a little program where I could run scripts by using my mouse and scroll through them. It was through this that I figured that out. When I tried to run scripts that had images in them, if they didn't have me setting the working directory.
I'm curious, is it because when you launch it from that, it's using that program's working directory?
That's my assumption. That is my assumption.
Yeah, that could be.
So up here, I'm just going to set the working directory.
Interesting. See, I don't normally set that, but now I understand why I probably should.
Yeah. So I'd say Even if you don't think you're going to need it
Yeah.
in like if you have assets, if it's only if you have assets. If you don't have anything that's being included in it, then I don't think there's any use for it. But and I'm just going to do a script directory. So now I shouldn't have any issues because this thing here isn't the native. It's not me launching it from here.
It's gonna look at that where that script is, and then use that for the path. Yeah.
Okay, so here we have our GUI. We have a simple image. Okay, sorry. Right. One thing I should do is make this always on top, because it's nice to have your working surface when you're going through this. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to attach a simple label to this. And this is good for testing to make sure that you have the right connection and everything. So when you start making, especially when you're first starting out making connection between buttons and what it's supposed to do, it's a good idea to make sure that your code, your syntax everything's right. You have the right spelling and everything. So I'm just going to attach this to a label, and I'm going to attach it actually to that temp one because we can reuse it. So now I've attached a picture to my temp label. And when I click anywhere on this picture, it's going to execute the contents of this.
And if I remember, the G is for go sub?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the V is for a variable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's they use a little different language when they say it up here. It's G label, but it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now here I have a button. It's ugly. It's yellow. It doesn't do anything. I don't see any feedback from it. But if I click on it, I do get a message, right? And that could be me opening up another program. Could be me doing anything that I could normally do with AutoHotkey. Right? So that's that. Now, but we don't want that. We want to actually have buttons that have, I mean, if we're going to invest the time in spending the time drawing something, we want to have perhaps some feedback. I like buttons that have a little bit of feedback. So when you press on it, it looks a little bit different than when you're not pressing on it. So I'm going to go through, and I'm going to take one of the, rather than sit here and draw one, I'm going to use one that I already have. So I'm going to take this one here. No, that's kind of, I'll use this one here. So I need to get its file path. You know, I can just save it as to where I had that. I'll just save it right to my desktop. Now, I created this button using another piece of software when I first started getting into doing custom buttons a little while ago. And when I created it in that software, it looked super amazing. But as soon as I transferred it over to here, where I can actually use it, all the texture to it was gone. It was very cartoony looking.
Did you decrease the number of pixels?
No, it's the format that this software, like, I don't think it's not really built to do PNGs. It's some other format.
Okay. Right.
And like I said, I'm not well versed in that kind of stuff, so I don't really know. So I just need that name now because I moved it. I have blue button up and blue button down. So I'm just going to add in that image.
Can you have spaces in the names like that?
Yes, if it has it in the name.
Okay.
Right. In other words, if I add an extra space, it's not going to read it properly.
It's not a valid path. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I just need its actual size. 268, 120. Now this one, one of the other problems that I had with this is working with rounded buttons. Like I said, I'm not an artist, so I don't go that deep into it. But because I have the border around it transparent, there's actually some pixels around the edge of it that aren't. So it's kind of like when it draws it, it kind of blurs, does a little blurring effect, right? So it's not like sharp pixel.
I got you. Yes.
Right? So if I was to put this onto the GUI just as is, you would see that. And I think the background was white for that. So if I switched, I'll leave it black for a second to show you what I mean.
Yep.
But it's one of the reasons why I don't use round controls anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So you can you kind of see the outline of it?
Yeah.
Right. So if I put this to white, I can get rid of that. But for our intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter. This is a design thing, right? So it's a little bit, but even still, it's just because it's a round one, and people who are more familiar with using these kind of creating pictures and whatever, they'll have a mile ahead lead on me on how to create it.
And I'm just curious, back in the Paint program or whatever, there are no white pixels near the edge. That's just the way it.
No, I would actually have to go see. I tried to. This particular software, it has the ability that I can select pixels all of the same color. And I can do it so I can do this, and I can try to get all those extra pixels off, but it just doesn't clean it up enough.
Well, I know. I'm curious if there actually are very tiny white pixels there, or
yes, they'll be very difficult to see right now. But if I change that
I
part
see
there,
a couple. Yeah, or I think I do.
Right now you can kind of see the jagged edges.
Yep. But now I just didn't know if that was a function of when you have a round thing, it blurs it, and that was a problem, or you actually did in your image have tiny little things here and there. But
it's when it created the image, it didn't want to create that sharp jagged edge, so it smoothed it by adding extra pixels.
Gotcha.
And it's those extra pixels that cause the issue.
All right, so no round edges is what I'm hearing.
Unless I mean you can do it. Let's say if I started with a black background and my GUI was black, then that's not a problem. Right? Or if it was white, but then that limits me on how many GUIs I can use a button that I might have spent an hour working on.
Right.
But I would say if you're you can use a round control, but maybe set it inside of a rectangle or a square.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So here I have my button up, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the logic. I can get rid of this here. I'm going to come down to the logic, and what I'm going to do is, because I'm using a custom control, what I want to do is I want to set a variable for it. So I'm going to, even though normally buttons, we don't really have to worry about variables with them unless we're moving them around, resizing them, etc., or doing stuff like that. But in our case here, I'm going to actually create a variable that's associated with this control. So I'm going to call it but1. It's a bad name, but...
Can you pause just for a second here? Because you said, when you kicked this all off, right, that last bit, you said, because I'm using a custom control.
Yeah, like I'm normally a button, it's just you click it and an action happens, right? I'm not keeping track of any values for variables in itself. Like I don't care that, like if I use a checkbox, if I click down on it, it'll change the value from a 0 to a 1. Buttons, you don't usually have to worry about that kind of stuff. In our case, we're going to think of it as a button, but we are going to have to keep track of that because we're going to. Yeah, because we're going to be switching. We're going to be switching images between when we press down and press back up.
Okay, thank you.
No, I'm wrong on that. I'm wrong, but there is a reason why we have to use this. There is a reason. My reasoning was wrong on the button part, on rather us putting a variable value into it. But in order for us to actually control this picture and change aspects of it, like its size, etc.
Gotcha.
We need that variable. We could use that built-in control variable, but that has to do with its position in our GUI. So I prefer just put a name in.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Rather than have to worry about, is this button, is this the first button? Or,
and you go and insert something later and you had 50 and now you got to
recalculate everything. Yeah. So we have that variable, and what I'm going to do is as soon as I come in here, I'm going to change the image from this button being up to button being down. So all I do there is I just use the GUI control. If I was using multiple layered GUIs, just like how if I put in here, you know, that one with the colon, in the GUI control, I'd also have to do the same thing. And it's in the first parameter that you put it in. So if I was, even though I'm not going to be using it, so right in this case, I don't need to use anything in this parameter here. But if I'm using it on a GUI that has multiple layers, I just put the name in there or that ID.
Yeah. In essence, you are having one and it's null, right?
Yeah.
And then the null is the same on each, and yeah, that's how it works.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that variable's name, which is but1. So this is the control that I'm going to be doing something with. And now I need to say what I'm going to do. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this image to its down state. So I can go ahead and run this now, and then we'll add in the logic after I do the quick demo. So here I have the button, and I know it's going to be a little bit tricky to see, but if I click on it, it should change the image to the other one. Did you notice that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so now what I need to do is program it so that as long as I'm clicking my mouse down, it'll stay in that state, and then as soon as I release my mouse, it'll go back up.
Right.
So like I said, there's lots of ways that you can do this. This is a very simple way. I'm just going to create a loop. And inside of this loop, I'm going to get the key state for my left mouse button. So I'm going to say left mouse. I'm going to create a variable left LM. And I'm going to say that this is equal to the key state of the left mouse button. So I don't know if you've done much with key state.
No.
It's all it is I'm passing a parameter into a function, and everything, all the different keys, they have their own names. So this is the name for the left button for your mouse. So I just pass in that, and it'll return a value. When I do it like this, it returns a value of a 1 or a 0 or a true or a false. Mm-hmm. And if I do, there's another way where I can do it where it'll return a U for up or a D for down. But I don't like that. I like the true or false method. So it's just putting it into a function to get key state. So now that I have that, it's constantly, every single time it goes through the loop, it's going to check for the state of my mouse. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little check to see if LM equals false. And I'll do it with just one equals, so that way people don't get confused. And as soon as it gets that, all I'm going to do is I am going to break out of this infinite loop. Okay, so as soon as I press down, it'll change the image to its down position, then I'll start into a loop. And I'm going to constantly check the state of my left mouse button. As soon as I release my mouse button, it's going to break out of this loop, and then it's going to switch our image back to the old image. So it's going to be back to its up image. And then after this, I would put anything that I want to program this button to do. So I could put a message box here, I could run a program, etc., etc. Anything that I would normally do with a label, I just add this little bit of logic into it to switch the images between each other, just for the feedback.
Yeah.
So now, if I click down, it'll go down. If I release the mouse button, it'll go back up. Right? So this is just me making the feedback. This is all about the feedback. Has nothing to do with what our button's actually going to execute.
Where, I'm just curious, where when you click it down, I understand that part. You let go. I understand at least the first part, and when it gets to line 30, after line 30, after it changes it back to up, is it just sitting there, or does it ever go back up to the, that the GUI up top.
It's as soon as it hits this return, it's back to our state, our normal resting state.
Okay.
So this button, it's like I think you said before, how the buttons, they kind of act like a hotkey. So instead of me pressing a hotkey, I'm pressing a GUI or interfacing with a control on a GUI that's kind of doing the same thing as executing a hotkey.
See, that was one of the things that when I first tried playing with GUIs, I finally realized like they're not linear, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can jump in and out of them in so many different ways, and it took me a while to rethink when I am, because you said then after this you can put where you want to go, but then I'm like, what I would do is I would probably have an actual go sub to a subroutine, because I would have other ways I might get to that subroutine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, but that.
Well, I mean, I know where you're going, but you can to make sure that everyone else knows.
Yeah.
You can have this one go into as many subroutines as you want from here, right? As you need. You can have function calls in here. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to have what happens when I press the button is it's going to pop up a message box.
Sure.
Right. But
right?
It could literally be anything I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Anything that I would normally put into a hotkey or into a GUI's button. I just add that little bit of extra logic in the beginning, so that way it controls the image. So the user gets that feedback, that visual feedback that they actually press the button. So I press down. As soon as I release, it'll execute the message. Oh, I forgot to save.
Yeah, no worries.
So when I press on it and then release, it gives me my message box. But now it has that visual feedback that they've actually pressed the button. They can see a change.
Okay, here now help me with this part too, because all right, I understand how you got right to the message box.
Mm-hmm.
It pops up, you hit the thing, but how is because at that point, I mean, there's no quote unquote loop, right, for the GUI overall, and yet it detects every time you click on it. Is it in some sort of like a loop? Is that how GUIs work? They're always monitoring?
What I would, the best way that I could probably do any justice in describing it is, you had done a topic before about messages, right? And how window messages.
Yeah.
So I picture it being something like that, where when I click on the GUI, Windows is constantly keeping track of where my mouse is and what it's doing, what kind of controls I'm in, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just one of those things. So the GUI, as soon as I go put my mouse into it, it's keeping track of where I am and what control I'm over, right? And one of the first ways I actually started playing around with doing these kind of things was, rather than when I first started, I didn't know to put the label in it. Instead, what I did was I took that hotkey that we had set up down here, and what I said was I kept track of my mouse, the clicks, and I said if my mouse is in static blah blah blah, then execute that, right? And that's another way that I could do it without having this, right? I could just say it keeps track of where my mouse is,
right?
Even though right now I normally don't have this going. Something similar to this is going on in the background all the time. Right. It knows that I'm in this control or that control, or right? And that's how I picture it working.
It's just with AutoHotkey, generally speaking, as you flow through the script, that's where you are, and yet I don't see a loop here on the GUI thing. Yet, obviously, that's what it's doing. Is it's continually monitoring that. And that's what it just. I gotta keep remembering that.
Yeah. It's with when you build a GUI, one of the defaults that it adds in is the persistent command. So that keeps it in memory. So that way, every time I interact with the GUI, it already has in memory where all the controls are and what they're supposed to do. So it just triggers that. As soon as I click on it, it'll trigger any labels that I have attached to it, and etc.
And let me just add, we don't have to do this, but if let's say you had a second button, and you click, especially, you know how you have it right now where it pops up after you let go with the message box here?
Yeah.
Let's pretend that message box here is still visible. You haven't dismissed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you click your other button. Is it?
I think it will launch it, but I'm not sure. Let
Okay.
me
We don't
try
have to. I was
duplicating.
just
No,
curious.
no, 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 no. That is actually something. Because there's certain things that I know that
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't expect. Like when I first started scripting, I didn't know about the GUI. So if in the script I had it pop up a message box, that pretty much canceled
Right.
everything else from the
That's
script,
right.
right?
Yeah, you're
But
stuck.
I've done some other things
Uh-huh.
where I will have a message box and yet my GUI can still do a counter or
Uh-huh.
things like that. So I'm not sure if about two controls, like I'm not. I think that it might actually work, but I'm not
And
100% sure.
and
So I'm gonna make
also
this.
like on that, that's not the multi-thread thing, right? Where you can have, if you add a multi-thread, to have more than one, it can have different places. But yeah, I'm curious.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna make this temp 1. So all I've done is I've changed button 1 to button 2 and temp to temp 1.
All
So
right.
now I have duplicates. All I have
Yeah.
to do is come in here and just change that to 2 and 2. And I'll change this as well. Just I don't think it's going to be a problem, but I'll do it anyways, just to make sure.
Yep.
Okay, so if I run this and I want to get that message box. Okay, so I have my message box. It's still up, and if I click on this one, I get my second
Wow.
message
See,
box.
yeah, that helped. I'm glad you did that actually, because that in my
Yeah.
head that wouldn't work. So
Yeah, like I said, I was doing something a couple of months ago where I had the GUI. It was constantly counting or switching values. So I had a random number generator, and it would just change values periodically. But yeah.
thank you. No.
Okay, so this is how I create that feedback button, or a button that has some feedback. The first way was just a basic image. So I'll add that in real quick, where if you don't really care that it has the the feedback mechanism or the visual feedback. So I'm going to save this to my desktop as well.
But I mean, as you're demonstrating, it's so easy, right, to build into it. So why would you not?
What do you mean?
Why would you not have a feedback? It's so easy.
Because it's two. Because now you have to have two images that are slightly different.
Yeah, I know, but I'm still saying is that it overall, it's not like I think you were saying if you did it in C, right? It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay. So here, all of these ones, these are all single. These have no feedback. So if I click on this, there is no feedback. So I just hit it. There's no change. Right? But it doesn't really make that. It's not that big of a deal, right?
No.
It depends on how good you want it to look. Is it worth spending that extra time to do it? Where
is there a way? I think I saw Maestriath one time where I think he changed the dimensions of it a little, and it made it seem like it. It doesn't matter. It was
no.
I forget what he did. It was interesting though because he didn't have two different images, but he did something that made it seem like there were.
Huh.
I'll have to
Well,
go.
there is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of the things that you can do with pictures, you can put a border around it. It looks a
that's what he
lot.
did.
It looks a
That is
lot.
what he
It
did.
looks a lot like this.
Yes, that's what he
Right?
did. He added
So
a
what
border.
I could probably do is, in one state it has the border, and in the other state it doesn't.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That was it. Anyway, all right.
Yeah, so it's a hex code. It's something like 0x200 or 250. It's one of those. I'm pretty sure it's one of those. So it wouldn't take me too long to.
Oh, it's okay. No, don't worry about it. It was.
Oh, okay, that's not it. It's maybe 250. Nope. Okay. Anyways, it's something like this here, and you have to go through. It's through the settings or the appearance. It's one of those sub menus that are difficult to find when you're looking for it. But when you're not looking for it, it's right there.
Right. Yeah. All right. Go proceed. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so this is our feedback, but the simpler way is if you don't care about having the feedback, you just add in, so what's it called? Exit button 1. I just need to make sure I remember the name. And I don't care where it goes. I do want its dimensions though. Actually, you know what? I'll let it size itself. I'll let it size itself. So I'll just add in, I'll add in a label. I'll call the label, and yeah. What did I call it? It was exit button 1. Yeah. I think that was it. Oh, I need that label. Yeah, one thing when you're building your GUI, as soon as you start adding in your labels, make sure you put them down here.
Right.
You can just add in the return and then go
Yeah.
back to building your GUI, but what did I call that? Blah. Right, so I don't need it to do anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
And temp 1 doesn't exist. Oh, I erased, that's right. I did erase, so I'll get rid of that, because I erased that other one. So here I have a button, right, and it's going to execute the contents of the label, but I don't need to put in the extra logic because I don't care if the image changes. Bless you.
Wow, you can hear it through my mute, huh? Okay.
No. I have you pick on my screen right there.
Yeah.
So yeah. So for the most part, if you don't really care about that feedback mechanism, you can just put an image. Okay. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the logic for the next control, which will be a checkbox. Now the checkbox is where I was going with the first one. Where I was thinking about why I need the variable's name. So here I have a simple checkbox, right? I have it when it's checked and when I have it unchecked. I know it's difficult to see, but I can create these. I can spend as long as I want on the artistic side of it, if that's important to you. And I'll just save these to my desktop. Desktop.
I'm just curious because I don't create many images, but when you're working with them, like in this example here, did you create one and then just basically copy it and fill in a different color or something?
Yeah, like if you look at this, all of these buttons here, they're all the same temp. I mean, at certain points, I scrapped the color and then started with a fresh color because
Gotcha.
it's getting distorted. But I think I actually have up here exactly how I go through doing it. So this one here I have ready to actually make modifications to it. So I'll just pick, for this case, the color is its own layer. I made sure that the color is its own layer, so I can just deal with that layer. So I select this, right? And then I come into adjustments, and I can change its basic hue and saturation. So there, now I have a new button.
That's awesome.
Right? And then I'll go up to the fourth layer, which has the text on it. I'll delete the text off of it, put in the new text, and then save it as a PNG. And then as soon as I finish saving it as a PNG, I undo that so I can get back to having layers again.
Yeah. No, but that is a great tip too. If you're actually creating stuff and you want to have multiple versions of the same save as, right, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just use a layer and swap out that. Don't mess with the text.
And
it's the same spot.
It was like I said, I first started doing this stuff in MS Paint, and these are two buttons that I actually created in MS Paint. So this is a feedback button that looks more like the typical GUI button, where it's just very low raised and it just switches between them. If I switch between them,
I got
it actually looks really convincing when it's on the page because it happens so quickly. But it's just a slight difference. Just getting rid of the gray around it, turning it black, and then that's it. But you can do it in Paint. You can do it in programs like this. You can do it, I imagine, in Photoshop and much of the other higher end stuff. So I need checkbox on button 1.
I use, by the way, I use Paint Shop Pro, which I bought like 25 years ago, and I still use that version. But it does everything I need, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? It's fine.
And in fact, I actually, now depending on this one here, depending on what state I want the checkbox to be. So let's say if I was using a normal checkbox, right? I could say in the options, I could say checked or not.
Oh, yeah.
Right? For a normal checkbox, if I want it to start checked, right? So here I would just pick the image that corresponds with that state.
Gotcha.
Okay, so here I'm gonna actually change this label to make it more clear that anyone who just happens upon it. So I'm gonna call the checkbox, I'm gonna call it checkbox label. So the label it's gonna go to when I trigger it is checkbox label. And I can get rid of this. Okay, now this one here, I once again, because I'm using something that's I'm going to be needing to access control to it, I need to give it a variable's name, but this time I'm also going to assign a value to it. So I'm going to call this checkbox 1. And then what I need to do to begin with is I'm going to give it a starting value. So we're going to have our starting in the on state. So what I'm going to do is up at the top, wherever I declare my variables, I'm just going to set this to begin with a value of 1.
Yep.
And then we're going to go into actually the logic of how we switch between them. So let me see if I can actually show it on the screen. Let me get rid of that. I know you can probably see that, but what I'll do is I'm going to change the color of the background so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so there's my color, and one other thing I want to do is double the size. So I think, if I remember correctly, I made them 20 by 20. Yeah, 20 pixels by 20 pixels. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to double it so we can see it a little bit more clear. So there, it should be a little bit more clear on the screen now. So I've set a variable associated with this control, which is a picture, but for us it's going to be a checkbox. And I've set its initial value to being checked. And then we click on it to change its state from one value to the next. It's going to execute the contents of a label called checkbox label. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come down in here and we're going to create the simple logic for it. So all we're going to do is as soon as it pops in here, what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 to the current value of that variable CB1. So we're going to take that variable that I've assigned to this control to represent its 0 or 1 state. I'm just going to add 1 to it. So as soon as we click on it, it's going to add 1 to its current value. It currently is 1, so as soon as we click on this, it's going to be 2. So what we need to do is we need to check to make sure that it only falls within our range. So what I'll do is I'll say if the value of that variable is equal to 2, if it equals 2, change it back to 0. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now it only allows 2 values. It allows a value of 0 or a value of 1, which is what I expect in a normal checkbox. But one of the good things about using custom controls is I don't know why you would want to, but I can have this checkbox have 50 states. It doesn't just have to have 0 or 1.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do a check.
I'm just curious, why didn't, instead of adding 1 to it, why didn't you just subtract 1 and then make sure that it equaled 0.
Because then it would be just the same thing. I would still have to check to see if it equals a specific value or not. So this way I just add 1 to it and I check if it equals 2. If it equals 2, reset it to 0.
Okay.
Maybe I'm thinking something different than you are.
No, no, I don't think there is a right. I mean, yeah, you're right. In all the grand scheme of things, it's identical, right? It's just, for me, I would set it back to 0 because in my head, I'm like, I want that to be a 0.
Are you saying like up here, as soon as it comes in here, it would set it to 0?
Right.
No, that wouldn't work.
Why not?
Because each time I click on this checkbox, it sets it to 0. So it can never have a check state.
Well, you don't have to do it first.
Can you elaborate?
You could do the other thing first, change the image first, and then set it to 0. It doesn't matter, right? It's fine.
Well, because I'm not going to be necessarily doing any programming in here. This is just to get the value to that variable. It could be when I press a button later on that it takes that value and does something with it.
All right, well, why don't you keep going as you are, and then it'll either make sense to me or I'll ask another question.
Okay. So I'm just going to set this up so it checks both of those states that I'm expecting. I'm expecting a 0 or a 1. So I'm going to do CB1 equals, it either equals 0 or it equals 1. If it equals 1, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep it like this. So I'm going to take my GUI control and I need the variable name. So I'm using the same variable name as that I'm using to store its value. So it's just CB1, and I'm going to draw the image of it being on. So if the state is 1, it's the image is that. Oh. I'm trying to think if I need any other logic in there. I don't think so. I don't think so. So what I'll do is I'll do the reverse for the other one. So I'll do this is off. I'm pretty sure I'm missing something though. Maybe it'll come to me as soon as I do this. All right, so now if I run, it starts with a state of 1. If I click on it, it should go to a gray. And I can switch between them. And now in my script, I have a variable that tells me whether the person selected this option or not. So if I had 50 checkboxes for them to check, I know that this one is selected on and whatever other ones are off. And I can keep track of their values.
And those would all be global variables, right?
No. For the most part, unless you're using functions, yes, it's all global. But my background, like I said, my background is in C, so my interpretation of global is a little bit different because everything's built within a function. In C,
yeah,
right? So a global for that would be that I can pass it from one function to the other. But with AutoHotkey, it's as long as I'm not going into functions, it's global.
As long as you don't make this inside of a function.
Yeah, it is global.
Yeah.
So I can, if I had another label that uses this variable, it knows its value.
Because that's where I was going with it. I'm like, okay, that just yeah. So
right. So let me show that. Let me show that. So what I'll do is I'll just add in a old-fashioned button. 30. So here I have in another label, I'll by pressing a button, I'll show the value that's stored in our checkbox. So if I hit this, we should get a value of 1, and we do. And if I click this, now it should give us a value of 0. So just like with our normal checkbox, we can do everything that we did with our normal checkbox, except we just added in the extra logic here to switch between images, which is just a feedback mechanism. It has nothing to do with the programming of it. It's more to do with our.
You're just updating the control to reflect the.
This part is the actual logic part that's more important to that, right? Just switching, making sure that we only have a 1 or a 0. And then we have our normal checkbox, just like with everything else. The last one we'll look at is, you clear on the checkbox?
Yeah.
Okay, the last one we'll look at is a radio button. Because what we're going to need to do is we're going to have not just this control here that has to change itself, but we're going to have a group of them where if I change this one here, the rest of them also have to change in perhaps some way.
One of them will, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to use this same checkbox because it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use the logic that's associated with it.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great way to demonstrate it.
Yeah. So what I will do is go to.
Which in reality, I gotta assume AutoHotkey is doing in the background with the normal radio buttons, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Multiple.
Yeah. Exactly.
Images. They just.
And this is one that you should. I'll do something with this that you should remember. I know you will remember. So checkbox 1. So I'm going to create 4 radio buttons. I'm associating them with a variable, rad1, rad2, rad3, rad4. I am going to, now, this is where when you're building your controls, you're going to want to actually just make some decisions on, do you want it to all to be custom, or do you just want that little radio box to be custom? Because unlike a normal radio button or a checkbox, I don't have any text associated with it. Right? You know how I can normally put some text beside it.
Right.
But in our case here, we'd actually have to either create a text control, or when we create the image, we would have the text on it.
Okay. Yeah.
So let me see. Here's a script that I'm working on right now that actually has, these are checkboxes, but I built into it the text that goes along with it. Right? But for our case, we're just going to use a text control.
Sure.
Which means it's going to look a little bit weird. I think here I'll do. Now me typing in white here is redundant because it's already white. I could just erase that, but I like to have that code there, so if I do want to change it. So me typing white here is pointless.
Yeah.
Because if I comment that whole line out, it's
but it's a reminder to yourself, right? Of like, if you want to easily change it. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to create 4 radio buttons, and when we select them, it'll switch the color of change the color of our GUI. Okay, so we have, this one is going to be on to start with, and we're going to make these ones here off. Now, if I had access to GUI control, I could do this with a little bit less code, but it's one of those things that I haven't breached yet, so I don't want to dive into it yet.
That's fine. Go.
Let me see. So I'm going to call this radio label 1, radio label 2, radio label 3, and radio label 4. And I'll come down here. How much of this code do I need? All right, so it looks like I can get rid of all this stuff here. And I'm just going to create those 4 labels that I have. Radio label 1. Three, 4. Okay, so this is what's the label that's going to get triggered if I click on this one here. If I click on this one here, what I want is I want this one to be in the on state. No, let me back up. Once again, because I'm using custom controls that have a value in them, I'm going to set the state to begin with.
What? Yeah.
Actually, you know what? With this one here, I might have been actually be able to do it as. So in here, if I click on this one, it's the only one that I want to be true. All right, so what do I call it? Rad2.
You want that to be a 0, don't you?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
No, I'm used to typing the stuff out and doing the same thing. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rad4 equals 0. All right, and then because I have this fresh in my mind,
Yep.
I'll just come down and
Crank it out.
Yeah. And then I'll go through each of them and switch one of the variables or 2 of the variables.
Yep.
All right, so 4, this one's going to be a 0, and this one's going to be a 1. This is 3, so this is going to be a 1, and this is going to be a 0. Going to be a 0 and a 1. All right, so if I click on the first one, it's the only one that has a 1 value. If I click on the second one, it's the only one that has a 1 value. The third one, and the fourth one. Okay, so there's our variable value, or the value that we're going to be using to do any programming later on with, right? Because we want those values. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do GUI control, and I'm going to basically do the same thing with 4 controls. So the control I'm going to be working with is the variable name for each. But once again, this is something that I could use the control name.
Yeah.
Which I think for radio buttons it's also a button, but don't quote me on that. It's been a long time. Like a normal radio button, when you do that control over it, when you look at what kind of control it is, static, button.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a button, but I can't remember for sure. So rad1, if rad1, I want this one. So if radio button 1 is the one that we've selected, we want the image that shows that. Else, we're going to copy 4 lines. Else, the other ones are going to be off.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, I can copy this.
Wait. Aren't you missing an F on each one? You have of.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I just realized you were going to replicate it. That's.
Yeah. On button. All right. So this one's going to be off, and this one's going to be on. This one's going to be off, and this one's going to be on.
I thought it was a little. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Okay. So there's our logic to deal with that. Now what we're going to do is in each of these, I'm going to have it go to another subroutine. Right? That's actually going to do the test on which one it's going to be switching to. Actually, you know what? I don't even actually need to do that. No, I don't need to do that. I can do it right here. But I could, to demonstrate, that I can go to other ones, I could have added in another label where that's actually going to do whatever I need to do with the values. But because I already know these are their own individual thing, I know what exactly it's supposed to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do GUI color. And if this one, it's white. Hopefully sooner or later, because I have this now, I'll be able to start getting all this kind of stuff in hot strings.
Right.
Yeah. Like you have. Let me see. What was the second one? Blue, red, green. Okay, there we go. We have 4 radio buttons, each of them attached to their own label that does a little bit of logic, changing the values of different things around. Once again, in this particular case, we don't need this at all. We have absolutely no need for this. We don't care. It doesn't matter what their value is. Like, we're not programming anything that's looking for that value. But most of your programs, when you're using radio buttons and checkboxes, there's going to be certain things down the road that are constantly going to be accessing, did I have this selected or that selected, right? In our case, we could have completely erased this, and our thing would have done the exact thing.
Switched out the picture, and right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Because it's just which subroutine or label it's jumping to that dictates that.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Oh, apparently I closed that before, so I have to actually run it this way. Okay, that looked a little bit weird. Oh, I know why. Let me fix that a little bit. Whatever. Okay, so here we go. We have it set up so that way, like I said, it's going to look kind of weird because of our text and the size of the control.
That's right.
So if I switch to this one, it should change the GUI blue, red, and green. And it constantly can only have one of them checked at a time. Just like a normal radio button.
Cool.
I'll do one last little thing. So we're done with the programming side. So we went through a couple of different ways of how to get feedback from our controls. So our button, if we press it down, it shows us that an image of it pressed down. If we release, it shows an image of it back in its normal state. We showed checkbox and how to switch between them and how to store the value into a variable, like as if we were using a normal checkbox, and then the same with radio buttons. The last thing is a quick demo of actually creating a control in 2 minutes.
All right, I'm starting the timer.
All right. All right. So I'm gonna do let me do 200 pixels by 40. So I'm gonna do 200 pixels wide, 40 pixels tall. The first thing I'm gonna do with this software is I'm gonna get rid of this white space. I don't need it. Oh, wrong button. Next, I am going to draw a square or a rectangle, and I'm going to make sure I don't have any curves on the outside because that whole thing where it draws that distortion. I don't need it to fill, and I'm going to make it 2 pixels wide. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see better, and I'm just going to create, you know what, I can probably, because this button's a little bit bigger, I can probably make it 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually undo that. Okay, I'm going to make it 3. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to do the same thing just inside of that. Now that I have those 2 layers, I'm going to select this current layer that I'm on, and I'm going to select all the pixels for that color. I'm going to change this color to maybe a grayish color. And I'm going to set this one to be gray, that one to be white. Okay, now while it's still selected, I'm going to go to a gradient tool, and I don't remember which direction is which, so I'll just try. Okay, I want the opposite. So this is going to be the inside. So I'm kind of going to have like a little hump. So the point where the 2 of them meet would be the highest point, like a peak.
Mm-hmm.
So where the 2 layers meet, this point right here, where this one touches the one that's still yellow, where those 2 points touch, that's kind of be like a little bit of a raised edge. So I'm thinking about how the light, if it's shining from down from above, this part right here is going to be a little bit darker than the bottom part here. All right. Now that I have that, I'm going to go back to the first layer. I'm going to select all of its pixels, and I'm going to do the same thing I did with the color. Except this time, what I'm going to do with the gradient tool is I'm going to do the reverse, where it's going to be see in the inner one, it's the bottom lip that has it, and this time it's going to be the top lip that has, oh, wrong direction. Once again, I'm not an artist. So I'm going to make the bottom. All right, there we go. That's good enough for me. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer. And I have too many things on my screen, so I'm going to use my rectangle select, and I'm just going to select the pixels in the middle. I'm going to paint that whatever color. Let's make a maroon button. Oh. Okay, there we go. I'm going to change this color here to black, and I'm going to use my gradient tool, and I want to reverse that. There we go, a little bit of easy lighting effect. I'm going to add one more layer, and in this layer I'm going to add my text. Select my font. Change its size. And there we go. I have a button that says Hellbent. Or it says There we go. And that's a simple way to create a button.
So the the outer stuff you were doing is just to try to kind of give it a feeling of shadows and light.
Yeah, exactly. So it's got like a little bit of a raised edge on it.
Yeah,
So
I've never done
this is it. This is it set at 100% size.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
But that's basically it. That's just usually as much as I put in effort into it. And then I'll just change it as I need it. So I'll switch to, like I said before, I'll switch to the third layer and just go and change its saturation. And then after a while, I'll just erase that and put in a new one. And there we go. Now I got another button. The different states, that's when you start getting into a little bit more difficulty. Like these ones here, this is a really bad button because of the perspective, like it's from the side and down, right? But this one I actually generated using GDI Plus, so this was done programmatically. So I didn't actually draw this, I just programmed where I wanted certain shapes to be. And then I get the effect of a button. But that's it. Do you have any questions on making custom GUI controls, adding them in?
No, I think that overall that was a good overview of the different things.
And just yesterday, I had done actually a tutorial on removing the caption. So.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so now, oh, that's a horrible here. There. Right. So I can use my own buttons to exit out of the script.
Yeah.
And et cetera, moving things around. And you can come up with a lot of customization. Now, one thing that we didn't get into here, but we sort of touched upon a little bit was about multiple layer GUIs. Now, one of the controls that button control where I switch up and down, where it has that state of up and down, if you do it rapidly, you do start to notice like it's kind of flickers a little bit. And one of the ways that you can get around that is actually having two layers. So you would have a background layer, and then all your other controls would be on a completely transparent layer that's sitting on top of it.
Gotcha. Right. Huh. Interesting.
And a lot of that distortion gets completely masked away. But that's building on a couple of different tutorials together.
Cool. Yeah, I know there's so many different parameters to like the 13 line, right? Where there's a lot of different things you can do.
Yeah.
And that's where we don't need to cover them, but it was interesting.
One thing with that is I can do or I can at least breach the subject is I'm gonna do so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to change this. I'm going to keep the caption for the first GUI, but I'm going to add that second layer to it. And now what I need to do is as soon as I remove the caption off of the second one, I need to offset it. So let's say if I'm putting them right on top of each other, I need to offset them. And this is probably, I might be off. It might be it might be 5 pixels, but let me see. So I'll change the colors. Let me do something with the colors. One I'll do red. Oops. I keep forgetting that for some reason that got relaunched. I don't know why. So I think they actually look pretty good. Okay, so I can see that I have a little tiny bit of that red bleeding through at the bottom. I don't know if you can see that.
Barely.
Right? So I would need to just maybe move it down like 1 more pixel, so that way it completely overlaps it. And what I would actually be doing with this one is with my GUI 2. This is where I would be adding in my control. So I'll add in a little button. I don't care where it's positioned. I'll just make it a big button. And the next thing I'm going to do is after this line here, so after I show it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set GUI 2 to be the last window that's found, so that way I can use WinSet and make that GUI transparent except for the button. So I'll do GUI 2 plus last found. And then I'll do and I'll set that color that the GUI is, which is blue, to transparent. Oh. So now if I move, you can see that the button's still there because it's part of its own layer. And actually I can't even select it right now. But and then I would have to make up here in their options up here, I'll what is it? I'll make the GUI number 1 the owner of that. So now I only have one GUI, or the one icon down here. And the next thing I'll need to do is actually make it so that way if I move one GUI, they both move. Oops. I'll do X1. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to offset the value that, so I'm going to be moving the first GUI and I'm going to offset it by taking this variable which is going to represent the position of the second GUI, and I just need to make it equal X plus that difference that we had. So it was 3 pixels. It was I think it was 3 pixels difference on the X-axis and about 25 pixels on the Y-axis. I think I'm okay. Hopefully that worked. Nope. Oh, my bad. Maybe that's the reason. Let's see. Maybe I'm using the wrong message. Let me see. That's not the right one, though.
Are you sure it's actually getting called?
No. No.
And this is where, just for everybody, right, it's a great thing of troubleshooting, of, you know, going through. My first thing is, man, I'm like, I make sure that it's actually doing what it's getting where I think it should be. Because you can save a lot of time.
I'm just not sure if I'm using the right, I'm using the right message.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, so that it's not even getting called.
Right.
It doesn't even look like it's getting called.
Yeah.
Maybe Yeah, I'll look up one that I know that has it. See, these are one of those the things that you have built into your hot strings, right? That you just auto-generate. Me, it's I go to my old script and copy it.
Well, that was what I used to do. You know, that's how I think, and that's how I think almost everybody, anyone writing any sort of code, they have their little templates in their head somewhere, right? Of like, oh, you know what, I did this and that one, right? And,
it's 232. See?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
It's 232.
I have no idea.
It's because yesterday I did a tutorial yesterday and I was using this one here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like I said, usually I just copy and paste.
You know what would be awesome to
hopefully. Here.
Oh, your message box. Get rid of your message box.
Yeah.
What would be cool is to look up all of those numbers and then put them in like a drop-down list so you can cycle through them and have the text to the right.
Mm.
And that way you have one thing that you just say, oh, I'm doing an on-message thing. And you can pick and choose. Well, at least it's getting called now.
Yeah, let me see where my code is. Usually I put it down at the bottom of my script. Here we go. I don't really care. I don't think I really need that. I might need it, but active window. Maybe.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Maybe it's that.
Sure, because you got to. It's going to make the focus to be that, right?
Yeah. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So now I can have as many layers as I want, and all I'd have to do is, if I have a third GUI, I just do X2, Y2, right?
Yeah.
And etc. So in this,
you move it. Line 73 says, "Hey, let's go look where it got moved to, and then adjust."
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Now I'd mentioned before I had done a script where I didn't have that bar up at the top, and I couldn't find a message to actually move everything around on its own. So what I ended up doing was I did a little workaround, and I discussed this during yesterday's tutorial that I had done, where rather than spending 5 hours looking up for something that might be just chasing a rabbit down the hole or whatever, I came up with my own solution where I could move one layer of the GUI, no problem. I could pick a layer, move it, and darn, I forgot that this is like 1,000 line code, 10,000 lines. I don't, you know what, if it's not where I'm not going to find it. It's either there or it's at the very bottom, and no, it's not there. This is one of the scripts where I just pasted in GDI plus.
Right.
Ah, here it is. Here it is. So I had this. I found this message after looking around for it, where I could actually move the GUI around, but because I had this one here has 3 layers, and I only actually needed 2 layers to do it, but there was a reason why I had a 3rd layer to it. So with this here on its own, if I try to move this, everything becomes detached.
Yeah, I remember you showing me this.
Right?
Yeah.
So what I did was I just added in a timer, and then that timer,
right.
That timer does exactly what this function here is doing. Right? I would just constantly check where my new window position was and then adjust. Except I did it inside of a timer instead of inside of that function. I guess in hindsight, I could have just put it in here. Damn, I lost it already. I could have just put it in here, but this was the first time I actually started working with fully custom GUIs where I didn't have the caption on it. Because all the other ones, I don't even bother touching the caption. I kept it on. I don't usually deal with the custom controls because they're too much of a pain in the butt. And I didn't really have a way of sharing it without people having to download, and that's not really how I like to do it. But anyways, that's that. You have any questions?
No, we're good. That was awesome.
That was an awesome session, Joe. Thanks again for coming by.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I'll see the rest of you on the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, recording done. Whew.